Hello everyone, welcome to another Flutter tutorial. In this tutorial we will learn what is the difference between Cubit and Bloc when using Flutter Bloc. I will begin with an empty Flutter project, setting an empty container as the home screen. So let's start by adding the Flutter Bloc package in the pubspec.yaml file. Once you have added the package, make sure to call the Flutter pub get to install the package. Let's start by implementing Cubit. First let's create a class that extends Cubit. And in the angle bracket, you can give the type of the state you want. It can be any Dart type, int, string, or any other complex object. Now create a constructor and pass an initial state to it. Here our state is of type integer and so we will set it to 0. Next we will write two functions, one to increment the state integer by 1 and other one to decrement the number by 1. A function that wants to update a state in the UI must emit a new state. Here our increment function will emit a new state after incrementing 1. Emit is a Flutter Bloc function to broadcast new state to its listeners. If any part of your UI wants to listen to the new state changes, it must be wrapped with a block provider, then a block listener provided by Flutter Bloc. Let's see how to implement it. In this example, we will wrap our main root home widget with our Cubit, so that the whole application can get access to the state here. You can wrap the material app as well. But it's up to you where you want to wrap using block provider in the widget tree. If you have more than one Cubit, use multi-block provider and provide all your Cubits. Now let's use the create method to return our Cubit here. Now, let's create a UI with a simple counter, featuring buttons for incrementing and decrementing, and then use it as the home widget for our application. I am going to name it Counter Home Page. Let me quickly write the UI. The page will have an app bar with title, Cubit example, and a counter title and its value. We need to update the value of the counter UI with the help of Cubit we created. Create a text for the counter title and counter value. To get the current state from Cubit, we need to get an instance of the Cubit we created. For that let's create a variable called counterCubit and access it using blockprovider.of context. Make sure to set the type as our Cubit class. Then the UI that needs to be updated should be returned from the block builder. Here it's the counter value text. So let's wrap it with a block builder and the builder method should return the counter value text. This means this part of the UI will be notified when the state in the counter Cubit changes. We will get the new state inside the block builder and can update the UI based on that. Let's add two buttons to increment and decrement the counter. The plus button will call the Cubit increment function to increment the counter and similarly for decrement. Let me quickly add icons for out floating action buttons. So as you see when we use Cubit we will be directly calling the state function with the help of Cubit instance. So we can move our state and business logic out of the component and components can be stateless. Here our custom homepage is a stateless widget. Here the initial state is set to 0 and when the increment is called the state is incremented by 1 and emitted back for the listeners in the UI. In this example we have the counterCubit variable which is an instance of our state class, and block builder is listening to the changes in the state, which in turn returns the text widget with latest state value. Let me quickly build the app and wait for it to run. Now the app is running, let me fix some UI issues and make it cleaner, by making the custom homepage a const, the column main axis alignment and also the floating action buttons alignment and spacing. Perfect, now we have a better UI. Let's press the plus and minus buttons to see if our app is working. So you can see our app is working good. It's properly incrementing, decrementing the state and updating in the UI as well. So let me explain the flow once more. We obtain the Cubit instance, call the method inside the Cubit state class directly, increment or decrement the state, emit the value which results in updating the text widget with latest state value. As simple as that. That's all with using Cubit. Now we will see how to implement same app with Bloc. For that I am going to create another file named main_block.dart. This will be the entry point for our block app. Then we will copy the same code we used for Cubit and make modifications to it to see what's the difference between Cubit and Bloc. This will be the best way to understand it. In summary, Bloc accepts an event and a state and returns a new state, where Cubit don't have events, it returns a new state when you directly call the state method. Let's start by creating an event enum counter event which has two events, increment and decrement. Then create a custom state that will hold the state counter integer variable. It will also have a constructor to accept the count. Now we will rename the CounterCubit class to CounterBlock and make it extend block, and instead of integer, it will now have the counter event and counter state. Rename the constructor to CounterBlock and the initial state can be updated to counter state 0. So that means the initial counter value will be 0. Now we will remove the increment and decrement methods because we will no longer be calling the methods directly from outside the state. Instead, all the functions will be triggered by events from the UI. Let's see how to do that. Override the onEvent function to implement the increment and decrement functions. Give it type counterEvent and then we will identify the incoming event using an if condition. If the current event from the UI is increment, then emit a new counter state with new state count value increment by 1. Same for decrement event as well. Then we will update our block provider to return the new CounterBlock class instance. After then replace the CounterCubit to CounterBlock inside the build method. The block builder has to be updated with new types, CounterBlock and CounterState, and this way the builder will have the latest state from the CounterBlock whenever it changes. Now instead of directly calling the methods in the state, we will fire appropriate events from the UI that will indirectly trigger the methods corresponding to it in the state, and new state will be emitted. Let me rename the CounterCubit variable to CounterBlock. Now we will fire the increment event from the plus button and decrement for minus button. To fire an event, we have to call the block function add, and then pass the appropriate event. Here we will pass counterEvent.increment. This will fire the onEvent callback inside the CounterBlock, and there we already have the code to identify the event and emit the new state. Let's implement it and see how it goes. To run the new main_block.dart file as a starting point of your Flutter application, you can use this command. Let's run the app. Now that the app is running, you can see the counter value says instance of counter state. That's because we are showing the state as a string. Let's fix that. The correct code should be state.count.toString. ToString is done to convert the integer to a string since the text widget accepts only a string value. On pressing the plus button increments the counter and minus button is decrementing the counter. You can see that the value is going to negative, so to improve our counter, we can update our logic to prevent negative values. This improvement is to show that all your logic must be implemented in the CounterBlock state class and not inside the UI. If the state count is less than 1, we are not emitting any state and therefore not updating the UI. When we refresh our app and on pressing the minus button, you can see that the counter is not going to negative. Here we are not adding any business logic in the UI. The UI is not aware of it, it is responsible for displaying the values provided to it. That's how we can separate state from the UI. The main differences between Cubit and Bloc are: 1. Cubit stands for ChangeNotifier Cubit. It is designed for simpler state management scenarios where you don't need to handle events explicitly. Bloc stands for Business Logic Component. It is a more feature-rich solution designed for complex state management scenarios. 2. In Cubit, you directly emit new states using the emit method without explicitly handling events in a dedicated method. Bloc involves handling events in a dedicated onEvent method, providing more control over how the state transitions occur. 3. Cubit is lightweight and straightforward, suitable for cases where the state management logic is less complex. Bloc is more powerful and suitable for scenarios involving intricate state transitions, side effects, and fine-grained control over events. In essence, Cubit is a simpler and more direct solution for straightforward state. That's all for this video. If you find my video useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share. The link to the source code is available in the description. If you have any questions or thoughts about this video, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye for now.